My name is Abigail Mitchell, and at 32, I was working 60-hour weeks as a night auditor at a Las Vegas resort, budgeting my grocery money down to the dollar. That was the same week I found out my parents had forged my signature to drain my grandmother's estate of $850,000. They split every cent of it with my sister, while I was living in a studio apartment with a window air conditioning unit that rattled all night. They let me drown because it was convenient for them. What they did with that money was theft. What they missed in my grandmother's files was an $8.2 million mistake. Welcome back to Cuthie Told Stories, where we tell quiet stories about women who stop carrying the weight for people who refuse to lift a finger. No screaming, no broken dishes, just the slow and satisfying click of the truth locking into place. Tell me how old you were when you finally stopped apologizing for other people's actions in the comments, and be sure to subscribe. The afternoon this story really starts, it was 108 degrees in the Nevada desert. I was sitting in my 12-year-old sedan in the employee parking garage, doing the math on a brake pad replacement I could not afford. My air conditioning had given out 2 summers ago. I had a hotel-branded highlighter in my hand and a stack of mail on the passenger seat. Right on top was an envelope from the Internal Revenue Service. It was an automated audit notice. I audit accounts for a living. I read discrepancies the way other people read the morning news. The letter stated in dry federal language that Abigail Mitchell owed back taxes on a capital gains disbursement of $850,000 executed 24 months prior. 24 months prior was the exact month my grandmother Helen died. She lived out near Reno and ran a few small businesses in her prime. When her heart finally gave out, my mother Brenda swooped in to handle the estate. Brenda managed everything for our family. She was the gatekeeper of the paperwork. She told us all, with practiced tears at the kitchen table, that Helen had died drowning in medical debt. Brenda claimed the estate was bankrupt and that she and my father Richard had to pay out of pocket just to cover a modest funeral. I believed her. I had no reason not to. Family protects family. That was the rule in our house, even if the rule only ever seemed to apply to my parents and my younger sister Vanessa. I was the daughter they called when a co-signer was needed, or when a bill needed negotiating. I fixed things. I absorbed the stress so they did not have to. I sat in the sweltering heat of my car and read the tax notice 4 times. The tax ID matched my grandmother's estate. The beneficiary listed was me. My first instinct was not panic. It was verification. Anger without evidence is just noise, and I do not have the energy for noise. I put the highlighter down, picked up my phone, and logged into the county clerk public records portal. I bypassed the paywalls using a trick I learned tracing accounts at the hotel. I typed in Helen's estate number. The files loaded slowly over the garage network. There it was, the final accounting of the estate. It was not bankrupt. The liquid assets alone totaled $850,000. And right there, on the second page, was a digital scan of a disbursement check cut from the estate trust made out to Abigail Mitchell. The check had been endorsed and cashed. I zoomed in on the endorsement image. It was routed into a joint account owned by Brenda and Richard Mitchell, my parents. I did not scream. I did not hit the steering wheel. I just sat there while the heat baked through the windshield, realizing the depth of the lie I had been living inside. My parents had stolen nearly $1 million meant for me, routed it into their own pockets, and left me holding a tax bill for phantom wealth. The IRS does not care about family dynamics. They care about signatures. I scrolled down to the estate release form attached to the disbursement. To claim the funds, the beneficiary had to sign a waiver acknowledging receipt. I stared at the screen. At the bottom of the form was my signature, Abigail Mitchell. It was perfect. It had the same sharp A and trailing L I have used since high school. But I never signed that paper. Whoever did this did not just forge my name, they traced it. My phone vibrated against my leg. A text message lit up the screen from my sister Vanessa, asking if I could come over this weekend to give her free accounting advice for a boutique she was opening. She needed me to do her labor, for free, completely unaware that I was looking at a stolen check with my name on it. The theft was not an accident. It was a strategy, and I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went before I let them know I had found it. The stifling heat inside my sedan was becoming dangerous, but I could not bring myself to turn the key in the ignition. My eyes remained locked on the cracked screen of my phone. The digital archives of the county clerk portal glowed against the harsh afternoon sun. I had pulled up the high-resolution scan of the estate release form. It was a single page of dense legal text acknowledging that the undersigned beneficiary had received their designated portion of Helen Mitchell's estate and thereby waived all future claims. At the bottom, resting on the printed underline, was my name. In my profession, you learn that numbers rarely lie, but signatures tell entire stories. I zoomed in on the dark ink spreading across the digital pixels. It was a flawless replication of my handwriting. The capital A had the exact sharp peak I always used. The double L at the end trailed off with the same slight downward slope. To a clerk processing hundreds of probate files a day, it looked perfectly legitimate. To the woman who supposedly signed it, the forgery was glaring. Real signatures carry momentum. When you sign your own name, your hand moves quickly, creating natural variations in ink pressure. The lines are thicker where the pen presses hard, and whisper thin where the pen sweeps upward. The signature on the screen had none of that kinetic energy. The ink distribution was uniform, heavy, and deliberate. It was not written, it was drawn. My mind began sorting through decades of family interactions, categorizing them the way I categorize mismatched hotel ledgers. I needed the source file. I needed to know where the forger acquired the template. The answer arrived with the cold clarity of a forgotten memory. 4 years ago, my mother Brenda hosted a milestone birthday dinner for my father Richard. Before the guests arrived, she cornered me in the kitchen and handed me a blank, oversized greeting card. She stood over my shoulder, watching me uncap my pen. She instructed me to press hard and make it legible so it would look nice when they framed it. I had thought her behavior was just another symptom of her exhausting need to micromanage every family event. I signed the crisp white card with a heavy black marker. Brenda snatched it away before the ink was even dry. I never saw that card displayed anywhere in their house. She had archived it. She needed a clean, high-contrast sample of my signature, unblemished by lined paper or competing text. The realization turned my stomach. The theft of my inheritance was not a crime of opportunity born out of sudden desperation. It was premeditated. My own mother had likely used a cheap light box or tracing paper over a glass coffee table to practice stealing from me. I navigated back to the previous screen, pulling up the scanned image of the cleared check. $850,000. The front of the check was made payable to Abigail Mitchell. I swiped to view the endorsement on the back. Underneath the second traced forgery of my name was a stamped deposit block. It contained a 9-digit routing number and a masked account number showing only the final 4 digits. I did not need a subpoena to recognize those 4 numbers. They belonged to a premier checking account at a regional bank in Reno. I knew this because 3 years prior, my father underwent a major knee replacement surgery. While Brenda played the role of the overwhelmed, devoted wife for her friends, she handed me a shoebox full of their financial statements and demanded I balance their checkbook while juggling my own night shifts. I spent 2 weeks managing that exact premier account. Richard was not an innocent bystander in this fraud. His name was on the joint account where the stolen funds landed. He had to sign the deposit slip. He had to look the bank teller in the eye and pretend the massive influx of cash was legitimate. The father who used to lecture me about the value of an honest day's work had quietly endorsed the theft of my future. I closed the browser tab. The silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of traffic on the Las Vegas Strip. The betrayal was so calculated, it left no room for typical grief. I did not want to cry. Crying was a biological response to loss, and I had not simply lost something. I had been robbed. I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen. I rested the pad against the steering wheel and began to chart the crime. Nurses chart vitals to keep patients alive. Auditors chart timelines to expose liars. I wrote down the date of Helen's death. Beneath that, I recorded the date the probate case was opened. Then came the date stamped on the forged release waiver. Finally, I logged the date the $850,000 check cleared their joint account. I stared at the chronological progression. The check had cleared on a Tuesday in early October. 2 weeks after that exact date, Brenda had summoned me to their kitchen table. I remembered that evening vividly. She had poured me a cup of cheap coffee, wiped away a fake tear, and delivered her performance about Helen dying penniless. She had looked her struggling daughter in the eye and claimed the estate was bankrupt while sitting on nearly $1 million of my money. The urge to drive straight to their house and kick the front door off its hinges was a physical pressure in my chest. I wanted to throw the tax audit in Brenda's face and watch her crafted reality shatter. But raw anger is a useless currency. Confronting a narcissist without overwhelming leverage only gives them the opportunity to adapt. If I called Brenda right now, she would deny it. She would claim it was a misunderstanding, or worse, she would use her head start to move the funds and destroy whatever physical evidence remained. I needed to secure my position. I needed to let them continue believing I was the compliant, useful daughter who never questioned the narrative. I folded the yellow paper carefully and slipped it into my purse. Just as I finally turned the key in the ignition, my phone vibrated in the cup holder. The screen illuminated with a new message. It was from my younger sister, Vanessa. Vanessa was the golden child of the Mitchell family. While I worked consecutive night shifts to pay for community college courses, Vanessa had been handed down payments, cars, and endless bailouts. Her text was predictably breezy and entirely devoid of self-awareness. She asked if I was available this weekend to come over and look at her projected profit and loss margins. She was preparing to launch an online luxury home goods boutique and needed my professional accounting expertise to set up her tax structures. She added a smiling emoji and promised to buy me a coffee for my trouble. I read the message twice. Vanessa was asking me for free financial labor to build her business. A business she was funding while I struggled to pay for a brake pad replacement. The timeline I had just built indicated the money had moved from Helen to my parents. But Vanessa's sudden entrepreneurial venture hinted at a secondary pipeline. My parents had never been able to resist spoiling her. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the hot concrete structure into the glaring desert sun. I did not reply to Vanessa with an excuse. I simply typed that I would be happy to review her numbers. If I wanted to track where my stolen inheritance had gone, I needed to follow the leaks, and Vanessa had always been the most expensive leak in the family. 2 days after I found the forged estate waiver sitting in the county clerk portal, I invited my mother to lunch. If you want to catch a thief, you do not confront them in the dark. You take them out into the bright light and you let them talk. I chose a high-end bistro in Summerlin, a wealthy suburb on the western rim of the Las Vegas Valley. It was the kind of restaurant that served $20 salads and pressed green juices. In the past, Brenda would have balked at the prices. For 30 years, she had run the front office of a mid-tier logistics company, constantly complaining about tight margins and coupon clipping. But when I texted her the address, she agreed without a second of hesitation. I arrived early and secured a table on the patio. I needed to observe her approach. When Brenda walked through the wrought iron gates, I almost did not recognize her posture. She wore a tailored linen suit and carried a designer leather handbag that retailed for more than my monthly rent. She moved with a frictionless glide, an ease that only accompanies total financial security. The woman who used to sigh heavily every time she opened a utility bill had vanished. She sat down across from me and immediately began rearranging the silverware. It was a classic Brenda maneuver. She managed objects the same way she managed people, ensuring everything bent to her exact specifications. We ordered our food, and I played my part. I hunched my shoulders slightly, letting my exhaustion show. I told her about the grueling night audits at the resort, the uncooperative software, the overtime hours. I gave her the version of Abigail she expected, the tired, compliant daughter who was too bogged down in her own daily survival to ever look up and question the architecture of the family. Brenda offered sympathetic nods, but her eyes darted around the patio, assessing the outfits of the other patrons. She was distracted by her own elevated status. I waited until the waiter cleared our plates before I laid the trap. I kept my voice casual, testing the structural integrity of her deception. "I was going through some old boxes last night," I said, swirling the ice in my tea. I found a photograph of Grandmother Helen's old house up in Reno. It made me wonder whatever happened to her estate. I know you and Dad handled all the paperwork when she passed. It must have been overwhelming. I watched her hands. I watched her respiratory rate. A normal person carrying the guilt of a near $1 million theft would flinch. They would break eye contact or fumble with their napkin. Brenda did none of those things. Her performance was terrifyingly flawless. She let out a practiced, weary sigh and leaned forward, adopting a confidential tone. "Oh, Abby, it was a nightmare," she whispered. Her voice carried the perfect pitch of a burdened matriarch. "I never wanted to burden you girls with the details, but Helen left us with a disaster." I tilted my head, projecting innocent curiosity. "What do you mean?" "Medical debt," Brenda said, shaking her head sadly. "You have no idea how fast end-of-life care drains an account. Medicare refused to cover the specialized hospice facility. Her property was heavily mortgaged, and the creditors swarmed the second her heart stopped. By the time the probate court finished sorting the claims, the estate was heavily in the red." She reached across the table and placed her manicured hand over mine. "Your father had to dip into his own modest retirement savings just to pay for her funeral. We absorbed the loss because family protects family, but it took a toll on him." I sat there, listening to this woman weave a seamless, fictional narrative out of thin air. She looked me dead in the eye and described an imaginary financial ruin, while the reality of an $850,000 payout sat comfortably in her joint checking account. She was not just lying to protect herself. She was enjoying the performance. She savored playing the noble martyr who sacrificed her own stability for the good of the family. I squeezed her hand back. "That sounds incredibly stressful, Mom," I said, keeping my tone even and soft. "I am so sorry you and Dad had to carry that burden alone." Brenda smiled, a serene expression of validated victimhood. "We do what we have to do for the people we love," she replied. The waiter arrived and placed the small black leather checkbook between us. The bill for 2 salads and 2 iced teas was $94. I reached for my worn canvas wallet, playing the role of the dutiful daughter, prepared to split the cost. Brenda waved me off with a casual flick of her wrist. "Put that away, Abigail. I have got this one. You save your money for your car repairs." She unzipped her expensive handbag and withdrew a credit card, dropping it onto the metal tray. The card did not make a soft plastic slap when it hit the tray. It made a heavy, distinct clink. My eyes dropped to the small black rectangle. "I work in high-end hospitality finance. I process payments for foreign dignitaries and casino whales. I know banking tiers." The card sitting on the table was a bespoke metal wealth management card issued by a premium brokerage firm. You cannot apply for that specific card. You have to be invited by a private banker. And the sole prerequisite for an invitation is maintaining a verified liquid minimum balance of $500,000 in their associated investment accounts. A retired logistics office manager and a former warehouse supervisor do not receive invitations for metal wealth management cards. I stared at the heavy black rectangle. It was an undeniable physical manifestation of the stolen estate. The IRS tax notice in my car proved the money had been routed to them, but this card proved they had not used it to pay off debts or help struggling relatives. They had parked the stolen cash in a high-yield brokerage account to generate passive income and fund a luxury lifestyle. This was not a crime born of panic or survival. It was an orchestrated heist. The mother sitting across from me was a phantom. The woman who raised me had been replaced by a confident, seasoned fraudster who felt entirely immune to consequence. The waiter returned, processed the metal card, and handed Brenda the receipt to sign. I watched the ink flow from her pen. It was the same steady, deliberate hand that had forged my waiver. I smiled, swallowing the cold realization. "Thank you for lunch, Mom," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "It is really good to see you looking so relaxed." Brenda tucked the metal card back into her designer bag, beaming with self-satisfaction. "Oh, it is just nice to finally enjoy our golden years," she said. "Your father and I are finally breathing easier." We walked out of the patio toward the valet stand. The desert heat hit us instantly, but Brenda seemed impervious to it. She adjusted her sunglasses and turned to me, shifting the conversation to her favorite topic. "Oh, before I forget," she said, her voice lifting with genuine excitement, "did Vanessa text you about helping her with her new boutique?" "She did," I replied, keeping my expression blank. "I told her I would look over her ledgers this weekend." Brenda clapped her hands together, thrilled by the arrangement. "That is wonderful, Abby. She really needs your structural brain. She is just so busy right now setting up the new house." I paused at the curb. New house? Last I checked, Vanessa was renting a townhome in Summerlin. Brenda laughed, a light, airy sound that grated against my eardrums. "Oh, I did not tell you. She just closed on a sprawling custom build out in Henderson. 5 bedrooms, a negative edge pool, the works. She's hosting a housewarming party next week." I calculated the current real estate market in Henderson. A custom 5-bedroom estate with a luxury pool would easily list well over $1 million. Vanessa worked part-time as a yoga instructor. "That is quite an upgrade," I noted, my voice carefully neutral. "Did she get a good mortgage rate?" Brenda waved her hand dismissively, a gesture dripping with newly acquired elitism. "Oh, she did not need a mortgage, sweetheart. She paid for it in cash. It is so much cleaner that way. Do you not think?" I stood on the hot concrete, watching the valet pull Brenda's pristine, luxury SUV up to the curb. My sister, who had never held a full-time job in her adult life, had just purchased a custom estate in cash. The pipeline was now fully visible. The stolen inheritance had flowed from Helen to the joint brokerage account and spilled straight into Vanessa's lap. I smiled at the fraudster, who shared my DNA. "I think cash is very clean, Mom," I said. "I will see you at the housewarming." I walked back to my 12-year-old sedan, the pieces of their grand deception clicking firmly into place. They thought they had buried the truth under thick marble counters and metal credit cards. They had no idea they had just handed the auditor the map. The drive to Henderson took 45 minutes of navigating the sun-baked asphalt of the interstate. Henderson is a municipality that prides itself on manicured wealth and aggressive homeowners associations. The neighborhood Vanessa had chosen was tucked behind a guarded security gate, requiring me to state my name to a man in a uniform before thick metal bars swung open to grant me access. I rolled my windows down because the air conditioning in my sedan was broken, letting the dry desert wind circulate through the cabin. I evaluated environments the same way I evaluate hotel balance sheets. I look for the hidden liabilities. The lawns in this enclave were impossibly green, defying the ongoing drought restrictions. That kind of artificial defiance requires constant, expensive maintenance. I pulled into a driveway paved with interlocking slate stones and parked my fading 12-year-old vehicle next to Vanessa's pristine white luxury SUV. The house itself was a sprawling architectural statement of modern desert minimalism. It featured sharp geometric angles, massive paneled windows, and a custom pivot door made of solid walnut. It was the kind of property designed to intimidate anyone standing on the welcome mat. I pressed the illuminated doorbell. A soft chime echoed from deep inside the cavernous interior. Vanessa opened the door wearing a cashmere lounge set that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She threw her arms around my neck, enveloping me in a cloud of expensive botanical perfume. She possessed the effortless, glowing aesthetic of a woman who had never spent a single night stressing over a past-due utility bill. Come in," she sang, pulling me across the threshold. "I am so glad you are here, Abby. I am drowning in spreadsheets, and I cannot make heads or tails of the inventory columns." I stepped into a foyer with ceilings so high they altered the acoustics of the room. The floors were poured concrete polished to a mirror finish. Abstract artwork hung on stark white walls, lit by gallery-quality fixtures. It was less of a home and more of a curated showroom. Vanessa led me through the open-concept living space toward the kitchen. For my entire life, she had navigated the world with a shield of weaponized incompetence. When she was a teenager, she pretended not to understand her geometry homework, so our father would just do it for her. When she moved into her first apartment, she acted confused by the lease agreement until our mother simply co-signed it and paid the deposit. Now she was opening an online luxury boutique and using that same helpless routine to secure free financial consulting from her exhausted sister. She gestured for me to sit on a sleek leather bar stool at the kitchen island. The counter was a massive slab of white marble imported directly from Europe. I placed my worn canvas tote bag on the pristine surface, extracting my laptop and a stack of printed ledgers she had emailed me the night before. "Can I get you anything to drink?" she asked, opening a double-door refrigerator that was seamlessly integrated into the custom cabinetry. "I have sparkling water or iced tea." "Just tap water is fine," I replied, opening my laptop screen. She reached into a glass-fronted upper cabinet and retrieved a heavy crystal tumbler. She filled it directly from the sink tap and slid it across the marble toward me. The irony of the moment settled over me like a heavy blanket. I was sitting in a multi-million-dollar custom estate funded entirely by stolen money, drinking cheap municipal tap water from a piece of fine crystal, while the thief's daughter prepared to complain about her finances. I took a slow sip. The water tasted vaguely of chlorine. So I said, adopting my professional auditor persona, "I reviewed the projected profit and loss margins for your boutique. Your overhead costs for packaging and branding are significantly higher than the industry standard. You need to reduce those expenses if you want to see a return on investment within the first operating year." Vanessa sighed, dramatically slumping against the marble counter. "Oh, Abby, it is just so frustrating," she whined. "Everything costs twice as much as I budgeted. The contractors are bleeding me dry. You should see the invoices for the backyard renovations alone." She turned and pointed through the massive sliding glass doors that led to the patio. Beyond the glass, a team of workers was installing a vast, negative-edge pool that seemed to spill directly into the desert horizon. The pool tiles, she continued, waving her manicured hand in distress. "I specifically ordered these iridescent blue tiles from Italy to match the aesthetic of the boutique branding. The shipping logistics were a nightmare, and the import taxes were completely unreasonable. Between the property taxes on this place and the custom upgrades, I feel like I am just hemorrhaging money." I sat perfectly still, listening to a woman who did not work complain about the heavy burden of extreme wealth to a sister who rented an unair-conditioned studio apartment. "That sounds incredibly stressful, Vanessa," I said, my voice devoid of any readable inflection. "Custom builds usually carry hidden costs. It is impressive that you managed to close on this property without carrying a massive mortgage. Mother mentioned you paid in cash." Vanessa picked up a stray piece of paper from the counter and folded it mindlessly, her attention drifting. "Oh yeah," she said casually. "Thank God for Grandma's little blessing, right? If she had not left that money for us to get settled, I never would have been able to cover the closing costs and the exterior renovations all at once." My hands rested flat on the keyboard of my laptop. The keys felt cold under my fingertips. Grandma's little blessing. The casual nature of the phrase was a structural failure in their grand deception. Vanessa was not oblivious to the source of her wealth. She knew exactly where the money originated. But the way she phrased it implied a shared inheritance. She said left that money for us. The mechanics of the fraud crystallized in my mind. Brenda and Richard had not simply stolen my $850,000 and kept it a secret from everyone. They had stolen my specific inheritance, washed it through their joint brokerage account, and distributed a massive portion of it to Vanessa, framing it as a generous gift from the estate. Vanessa was entirely complicit in receiving the funds. Whether she knew they had forged my signature on a legal release form was irrelevant. She believed I had voluntarily surrendered my portion, Or she was too absorbed in her own greed to ever ask why the sister who worked night shifts was driving a broken car while she imported pool tiles from Europe. I looked at her glowing, oblivious face. She was the ultimate beneficiary of my silent labor. My parents had stolen my future to pave her patio. I am sure Grandma would be thrilled to see how you are spending her blessing, I said, holding her gaze for exactly 1 second longer than socially acceptable. Vanessa smiled brightly, missing the clinical coldness in my eyes. I really think she would, she replied. Anyway, let us look at these ledgers before I lose my mind completely. Before I could bring up the first spreadsheet, the chime of the front doorbell echoed through the foyer again. Vanessa frowned, glancing at her expensive smartwatch. I am not expecting any deliveries today, she muttered, pushing off the counter and walking toward the front of the house. I remained seated at the island, taking another sip of the chlorinated tap water. I listened to the heavy walnut door swing open, followed by the low murmur of a familiar male voice. Footsteps approached the kitchen, moving with a hurried, anxious rhythm. My father, Richard, stepped into the room. He was wearing slacks and a pressed golf shirt, but his posture was unusually rigid. Richard was a man who preferred to avoid conflict at all costs. He spent his entire life retreating to his garage or the golf course whenever Brenda started managing the family. Seeing him initiate an unexpected visit signaled a significant deviation from his baseline behavior. In his right hand, he gripped a thick manila folder. His knuckles were white. "Abby," he said, stopping abruptly when he saw me sitting at the counter. His voice was slightly breathless. "Your mother said you were going to be here today." "Hello, Dad," I replied, closing my laptop screen. "Is everything all right?" He forced a stiff, unnatural smile. His eyes darted toward Vanessa, then back to me. "Yes, everything is fine," he stammered, clearing his throat. "Actually, it is good that I caught you. Your mother and I were reviewing some old files with our accountant this morning, and we found a bit of a clerical error." He walked forward and placed the manila folder on the marble island next to my crystal glass. He tapped his index finger against the cardboard. His breathing was shallow. "It is just some old tax cleanup regarding Helen's estate," he continued, his tone straining for casual indifference. "The accountant said we missed a standard release page during the final probate filing. We just need your signature on it today so we can submit it to the county and close the books for good." I stared at the closed folder. A routine tax cleanup, an old release page. The trap had just arrived in a manila envelope. They knew I had received the audit notice from the Internal Revenue Service, and they were terrified. They needed a fresh signature to retroactively immunize their felony. The game of quiet observation was over. The physical confrontation had officially begun. Richard stood next to the imported marble island in my sister's kitchen, gripping a thick manila folder. His knuckles were pale from the tension. He was a man who had spent 30 years managing freight logistics in a warehouse, avoiding conflict whenever possible. He preferred to retreat to his garage or watch golf rather than handle uncomfortable conversations. Seeing him initiate an unexpected visit signaled a severe deviation from his baseline behavior. His breathing was shallow, and his eyes darted toward the sliding glass doors where the contractors were installing the new pool. Before he could explain why he was standing there, the heavy walnut front door chimed a second time. Rapid footsteps echoed across the polished concrete floor of the foyer. Brenda marched into the room. My mother had clearly orchestrated a coordinated ambush, relying on my father to secure the perimeter before she delivered the pitch. She wore a tailored linen suit, but her relaxed lunch posture had vanished. She moved with a sharp, predatory focus, operating on a rigid internal deadline. "I am so glad your father caught you before you left," she said, her tone bright and brittle. "We were just running errands nearby and figured we could handle this little administrative chore right now." I looked from Brenda to Richard. Richard averted his eyes, focusing his attention on a bowl of decorative lemons resting on the counter. He was the accomplice, but Brenda was the architect. She reached across the stone surface and flipped the manila envelope open. Inside sat a single printed document bearing the header of a standard legal release. She smoothed the crisp white paper flat with her manicured hand. It is just a formality, she continued, adopting the sickly sweet management cadence she utilized whenever she required blind compliance. The county clerk found a missing signature line from your grandmother's probate file. They are threatening to delay some of our tax filings unless we retroactively close the loop. You know how government bureaucrats are with their endless red tape. She withdrew a heavy gold pen from her designer handbag and clicked the top. She held the instrument out toward me. I recognized the pen immediately. It was a retirement gift Richard received from his former employer. He kept it in a velvet box on his desk and only ever used it to sign official mortgage papers or vehicle titles. Now Brenda was using his milestone reward to facilitate a felony. When I did not immediately reach for the pen, Richard shifted his weight. He took the pen from Brenda's hand and began tapping the metallic tip against the marble counter. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythmic clicking echoed through the cavernous kitchen. It was the frantic physical manifestation of a guilty conscience unable to tolerate the silence. Just sign at the bottom, Brenda instructed, pointing a manicured finger toward a blank horizontal line. We can get this file by tomorrow morning and stop bothering you about it. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool stone, and began to read the fine print. In my profession, you never authorize a ledger without verifying the underlying transactions. I scanned the dense legal paragraphs. The document was not a standard clerical update or a missing tax form. It was a retroactive indemnity waiver. The text explicitly stated that the undersigned beneficiary acknowledged full receipt of all owed funds and released the executor from any and all future liability regarding the disbursement of estate assets. It included a hold harmless clause designed to block any future civil litigation or criminal inquiries. They were asking me to legally immunize them for the theft of my inheritance. If I signed my name on that blank line, I would validate the forged check sitting in the county archives. I would permanently assume the tax burden for the phantom wealth and surrender my right to prosecute them. They wanted me to lock my own cage and hand them the key. The quiet in the kitchen stretched tight, broken only by Richard's relentless tapping. The metallic click grew faster. Abby Brenda prodded her voice, losing a fraction of its forced sweetness. It is a standard form. Your sister already signed hers last week. Vanessa looked up from her phone, entirely oblivious to the legal mechanics unfolding feet away from her. Oh yeah, she chimed in. Mom brought mine over on Tuesday. It took 2 seconds. You just sign it and they leave you alone. Vanessa served as their ultimate shield. Brenda used her golden child to normalize the fraud. If Vanessa signed it without asking questions, then Abigail should do the same. But Vanessa received a custom desert estate funded by cash. I received a federal audit notice in a sweltering parking garage. Family protects family, Brenda added, lowering her voice, to deploy the emotional extortion she had perfected over 3 decades. We just need to put your grandmother's estate behind us so we can all move forward. We have carried this burden long enough. I kept my eyes on the paper, calculating my tactical options. If I confronted them right now, sitting in a house bought with my stolen money, they would panic. Brenda would instantly initiate a smear campaign to discredit my mental health. Richard would hire defense lawyers using the stolen funds. They would lock down the brokerage accounts and shred any remaining physical evidence. Raw confrontation was a liability. I needed a clean exit strategy. I slowly reached up and pressed my fingertips hard against my temples. I squeezed my eyes shut and let out a long, trembling breath. Is something wrong? Richard asked, his voice tight with anxiety. The tapping of the gold pen finally stopped. I squinted at the bright recessed lighting above the kitchen island, mimicking the physical symptoms of a visual aura. I am getting one of my migraines, I whispered, making my tone sound strained and authentic. The fluorescent lights at the resort triggered one last night, and I think looking at these spreadsheets just brought it back. My vision is starting to blur. Brenda frowned. Her patience was thinning rapidly. Her carefully constructed ambush was losing its momentum. Just scribble your name quickly and you can go home and rest, she insisted, pushing the document an inch closer to my hands. I pressed harder against my temples, feigning a grimace of pain. I can barely focus on the letters right now, Mom, I said. I do not want to sign outside the box and make the county reject the form all over again. Let me take this home. I will sign it tonight after my prescription medication kicks in and drop it off at your house tomorrow morning." I did not wait for her permission. I reached across the marble, folded the document in half, and slid it directly into my canvas tote bag. Brenda stiffened. The muscles in her jaw clenched tight. She reached out as if to physically grab my bag, but stopped herself just in time. She could not force the issue without revealing her desperation. She had to maintain the illusion that this was merely a trivial clerical chore. "I suppose that is fine," she said, her tone flat and cold. "But I need it first thing in the morning, Abigail. We are on a strict deadline with the accountant, and I will not tolerate any delays." "I promise," I said, zipping my bag shut. I packed up my laptop, ignoring the mild look of concern Vanessa cast in my direction. I stood up, swaying slightly to sell the physical ailment. Richard took a step back, clearing a path for me toward the foyer. "Thank you for doing this, Abby," he mumbled, looking down at the polished concrete floor. "We appreciate your help." I walked out of the kitchen, pulling my tote bag tight against my shoulder. I navigated the long hallway, exited through the heavy walnut door, and stepped back into the suffocating heat. I walked straight to my old sedan, unlocked the door, and climbed inside. I turned the ignition, letting the broken air conditioning blow warm air across my face. I pulled the folded indemnity waiver out of my bag and tossed it onto the passenger seat, right next to the letter from the Internal Revenue Service. They thought they had cornered me into a blind surrender. Instead, they had just hand-delivered the exact piece of physical evidence required to prove their conspiracy. I put the car in drive and exited the gated community. I did not head toward my cramped studio apartment. I merged onto the interstate, leaving the artificial green lawns of Henderson behind. I pointed my vehicle toward the towering glass structures of downtown Las Vegas. I needed someone who understood the structural vulnerabilities of a felony. I needed an estate attorney who dismantled financial crimes for a living, and I was not going to stop driving until I found one. The drive from Henderson to the downtown Las Vegas legal district took 40 minutes. I navigated the congested interstate, leaving the sprawling artificial lawns of the suburbs behind. The towering glass structures of the financial sector reflected the harsh desert sun, casting long, angular shadows across the pavement. I parked my aging sedan in a subterranean garage and walked toward a sleek commercial high-rise. During my tenure executing night audits for the resort, I occasionally processed billing for a specialized legal syndicate that handled high-net-worth asset disputes for casino executives. I had retained one of their embossed business cards in my glove compartment for 2 years. They did not handle petty claims. They dismantled sophisticated financial structures. I rode the silent elevator to the 32nd floor, stepping into a reception area paneled in dark mahogany. The environment radiated sterile efficiency. There were no decorative plants or soothing background music. It was a space engineered for tactical warfare. I approached the front desk, requesting an emergency consultation. I held my canvas tote bag tight against my hip. The receptionist asked for the nature of my visit. I placed my driver license on the polished wood counter and stated that my family had just handed me the paper trail to their own prosecution. 10 minutes later, a set of heavy frosted glass doors swung open. A tall man wearing a tailored charcoal suit walked into the lobby. His expression was sharp, analytical, and devoid of any superficial warmth. This was Marcus Thorne. He was a senior partner known for untangling complex estate fraud. I appreciated his lack of false sympathy. Marcus escorted me into a corner conference room featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the arid valley. He motioned for me to sit in a structured leather chair across from a transparent glass desk. He did not ask how my day was going. He simply sat down, folded his hands, and waited for me to present the problem. I unzipped my tote bag and laid the paper trail out on the glass surface in strict chronological order. The automated tax audit from the federal government sat on the far left. The scanned digital check for $850,000, downloaded from the county archives, rested in the middle. Finally, I placed the uncreased retroactive indemnity waiver Brenda had tried to force me to sign just an hour prior directly in front of him. Marcus retrieved a pair of silver reading glasses from his breast pocket and slid them onto his face. For 10 straight minutes, the only sound in the room was the crisp turn of paper and the faint hum of the central climate control. He cross-referenced the dates. He studied the ink distribution on the signature lines. He traced the routing numbers printed on the back of the cleared check. He picked up a heavy fountain pen and tapped the metallic tip against the signature line on the forged estate release form. "This is not a family squabble," Abigail Marcus stated flatly, holding my gaze over the rim of his glasses. "This is a Class B felony." The legal term hung in the chilled air. I absorbed the reality without flinching. My parents had crossed a threshold that carried mandatory state prison time. Marcus shifted his attention toward the bottom corner of the digital scan. He brought the paper closer to the desk lamp, illuminating a circular blue stamp pressed over the forged signature. "A forged endorsement is a solitary crime," he explained, his voice maintaining a low, gravelly cadence. "But a fabricated signature, authenticated by an official officer of the state, elevates the charge to a coordinated conspiracy. Are you familiar with the notary public who sealed this document?" I leaned forward, reading the name printed inside the blue circular stamp. Jessica Rollins. My stomach tightened, pulling my posture rigid. I knew that name. "Yes," I replied, keeping my tone clinical. "Jessica is Vanessa's college roommate. She is currently acting as the silent business partner for my sister's new luxury boutique." The criminal circle was terrifyingly tight. They had kept the felony entirely in-house, using a loyal friend to authenticate a fraudulent document. Vanessa was not just a naive beneficiary oblivious to the source of her sudden wealth. She was an active participant. She had leveraged her closest friendship to secure the official state seal required to bypass the probate court. Marcus folded his glasses and set them down next to the forged waiver. "Your sister provided the key that unlocked the vault," he said, reading my expression. "The notary stamp is the only reason the county clerk released the funds to your parents' joint account. If Jessica Rollins stamped this form knowing you were not in the room, she forfeited her license and invited federal wire fraud charges." I stared at the name inside the blue circle. The betrayal deepened, compounding the initial theft. While I was rationing groceries and taking overtime shifts to stay afloat, my own sister had conspired with her college roommate to steal my future. Then she had the audacity to invite me into her custom home and ask for free financial labor. If I had signed this new retroactive waiver in her kitchen today, what would have happened, I asked. Marcus gestured toward the fresh document Brenda had provided. "You would have retroactively validated the forgery. The waiver contains a hold harmless clause. It is a legal shield designed to immunize the executor. If you signed it, the federal government would hold you entirely responsible for the tax burden of the phantom wealth. Your parents would walk away with the cash, and you would spend the next decade paying off an $850,000 tax penalty on an empty bank account." He leaned back in his leather chair, assessing my composure. "The instinct right now is usually anger. Most clients want to call their relatives and scream. If you confront them today sitting in a house bought with your stolen money, they will panic. Your mother will instantly initiate a smear campaign to discredit your mental stability. Your father will hire defense attorneys using your stolen funds. They will lock down the brokerage accounts and shred any remaining physical evidence." "I already know," I replied, my voice steady. "Raw confrontation is a liability." I told them I had a migraine. I promised to return the signed form tomorrow morning. "Good," Marcus said. "We need the element of surprise. We need to construct an airtight snare before they realize the ground is shifting beneath them." He opened a sleek laptop resting on the corner of his desk. He entered a complex sequence of passwords, bypassing the standard public portal to access the secure state judicial database. He possessed administrative credentials that allowed him to view unredacted court filings. "I need to see the original architecture of Helen Mitchell's estate," he explained, his fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. "Executors rarely deploy retroactive waivers for simple cash theft. They utilize them to block routine audits on larger, hidden assets." I watched the reflection of the screen glow against his glasses. He inputted my grandmother's social security number and the original probate case identification code. Dense digital text began scrolling past his eyes. He bypassed the standard asset distribution forms, digging deeper into the archived registry. His hand stopped moving the mouse. The scrolling halted. Marcus leaned closer to the monitor, his brow furrowed in deep analytical concentration. He read a specific paragraph twice. The silence in the conference room stretched thin, replacing the earlier tension with a new, unyielding gravity. He turned away from the screen and looked directly at me. The clinical detachment in his eyes was replaced by sharp, intense focus. "Abigail," he said, his tone dropping an octave, "did your parents ever mention the commercial trust?" I left the mahogany reception area of Marcus Thorne's law firm and stepped back into the suffocating afternoon heat of downtown Las Vegas. Marcus required time. He needed to bypass the digital portal and physically requisition the unredacted commercial trust documents from the county archives. I drove straight to the resort for my scheduled night audit shift. The transition from confronting a coordinated felony to executing standard hotel accounting provided a strange, necessary comfort. My brain craved the predictable structure of ledgers and balance sheets. My shift began in the quiet isolation of the financial back office, located deep within the administrative levels of the casino. The room was illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights and filled with the low, continuous hum of server racks. My primary responsibility was reconciling the daily transaction logs, verifying that the merchant batches matched the physical receipts collected from the various restaurants and entertainment venues across the property. When a number was missing, I had to track the discrepancy through the digital footprint until the ledger balanced. Tonight, I was applying that same relentless methodology to my own bloodline. I placed my cellular phone face up on the desk next to my keyboard. I had promised Brenda I would drop off the signed retroactive waiver at her house first thing in the morning. When the morning passed into afternoon and the afternoon faded into night without a word from me, she knew her ambush in Henderson's gated community had failed. She realized I had kept the document. A strategic manipulator never waits to be accused. When they sense their control slipping, they strike first to seize the narrative. Brenda needed to inoculate the extended family against any truth I might present. She had to frame my silence not as an investigation, but as a malicious attack. At 1 a.m, my phone screen illuminated. A text message arrived from my cousin David. "I heard what you are doing to your parents," the message read. "You should be ashamed of yourself, trying to extort retired people over imaginary money." 10 minutes later, a second message appeared, this time from my Uncle Thomas. "Your mother is in tears, Abigail. How can you demand cash for a simple clerical error? After everything they sacrificed to raise you, this is how you repay them?" I did not touch the device. I kept my hands on the keyboard, typing my access codes and comparing room charges to credit card authorizations. The physical contrast between my silent workspace and their frantic digital hysteria was stark. Brenda was writing a fictional script casting me as unstable and greedy to preemptively discredit any legal accusations I might leverage against her. She was insulating her stolen wealth with character assassination. She had clearly spun a detailed story, claiming I discovered a minor filing mistake regarding Helen Mitchell's estate and decided to hold the paperwork hostage. In her version of reality, I was shaking down my elderly parents for a payout. It was a brilliant psychological pivot. She used my genuine financial struggles as evidence of my supposed greed. At 2:15 in the morning, a new voicemail icon appeared on my screen. It was from Aunt Janice. Janice was Brenda's older sister and had always functioned as the family enforcer. She policed our behavior to ensure everyone worshipped the ground Brenda walked on. I clicked the audio file and placed the phone on speaker. I let her voice echo off the cinder block walls of the back office while I continued to sort the guest folios. "Abigail, I do not know what kind of mental break you are experiencing, but you need to stop this nonsense right now," Janice's voice shrilled, dripping with practiced condescension. "Your mother called me weeping tonight. She told us how you refused to sign a basic county form just to punish them. You have always been so bitter about Venice's success. We all know you struggle to pay your rent, but trying to shake down your own parents is a new low. I paused my typing and listened to the steady rhythm of the accusation. If you think you can drag this family through the mud over some fabricated theft, you will find yourself entirely isolated. Janice continued, her tone hardening into a direct threat. You are breaking your father's heart. Call your mother and apologize before she cuts you off for good. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and looked at the black screen of my phone. Janice had delivered a masterpiece of psychological projection. She weaponized my independence, painting the quiet, struggling life Brenda forced me into as a symptom of deep-seated bitterness. They were using my empty bank account as proof that I was the thief. I did not cry. I did not feel the familiar sting of familial rejection. That phase of my life had burned away in the desert heat earlier that afternoon. Instead, I opened a new blank spreadsheet on my desktop monitor. I titled the document, Witness Intimidation and Coercion. I logged the timestamp of David's text message. I logged the timestamp of Thomas accusing me of extortion. I downloaded the audio file of Janice's voicemail and attached it to the digital ledger. Every hostile message they sent was evidence. Every fabricated accusation they circulated proved they were actively collaborating to suppress my legal rights. They thought they were bullying me into submission. In reality, they were documenting their own conspiracy. The urge to reply was a ghost I easily ignored. I knew that responding would only feed their narrative. If I defended myself, I would give them a script to react against. By remaining a silent void, I forced them to escalate their own paranoia. They expected a fight. They expected me to scream and demand answers in the family group chat. My cold, methodical silence was a weapon they did not know how to counter. The hours ticked by. I finished reconciling the final casino registers. I batched the credit card terminals and locked the physical receipts in the designated vault. The isolation they threatened was officially a reality. My parents had effectively amputated me from the bloodline to protect their secret accounts. But sitting in that quiet office, I realized I was only mourning a family that never truly existed. They were just a collection of people bound together by financial convenience and shared delusions. My shift ended at 7 a.m. I gathered my belongings, packing my canvas tote bag, which still contained the fraudulent retroactive waiver. I walked out of the administrative corridor and rode the elevator up to the ground floor. I exited the resort through the employee doors. The morning sun was just breaking over the eastern mountains, painting the Las Vegas sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. The desert air was already warming up, promising another unforgiving day. I unlocked my aging sedan and climbed into the driver's seat. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, feeling the physical toll of the sleepless night settling into my bones. The smear campaign was just the opening salvo. Brenda would not stop until she felt secure, and she would never feel secure as long as I held that unsigned waiver. Before I could turn the key in the ignition, my phone began to ring. It was not a text message from an angry relative. The caller identification displayed the name Marcus Thorne. I accepted the call and lifted the device to my ear. "Where are you?" Marcus asked. His tone lacked any introductory pleasantries. The gravelly cadence of his voice was tight with focused energy. "I'm in the parking garage at work," I replied, shifting my foot onto the brake pedal. "I just finished my audit shift." "Come back to my office right now," Marcus instructed. The heavy gravity in his voice made the hairs on my arms stand up. I bypassed the digital portal and pulled the hard copies directly from the presiding judge's archived records. "Did you find the rest of the probate paperwork?" I asked, gripping the steering wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles white. "I found out what your grandmother actually left you," he said. The morning commute back into the financial district was a blur of sun-baked asphalt and creeping exhaustion. I had been awake for 24 hours, fueled by stale break room coffee and the adrenaline of an active investigation. I parked in the same subterranean structure and rode the elevator to the 32nd floor. The mahogany reception area was empty this early in the day, but the frosted glass doors to the inner suites were propped open. Marcus Thorne was waiting for me in the same corner conference room. The pristine glass desk was no longer empty. It was covered in thick stacks of legal-sized paper, bound by brass brads. He had retrieved the hard copies of the unredacted probate filings from the county archives. The sheer volume of the documentation signaled a financial structure far more intricate than a simple cash inheritance. "Sit down, Abigail," he instructed, his voice lacking any trace of morning fatigue. I took my seat across from him, placing my canvas tote bag on the floor. I braced myself for bad news, assuming Brenda had somehow drained other hidden accounts while I was working my night audit shift. "Your mother is a skilled opportunist." Marcus began resting his hands on top of the tallest stack of paper. "She found $850,000 in liquid cash, routed it through a forged release, and distributed it to your sister. She thought she had emptied the vault. But your grandmother Helen was an astute businesswoman. She understood exactly who she raised." Marcus pulled a single bound folder from the center of the desk and slid it toward me. "Helen ran a few small businesses in Reno during her prime." Marcus continued his tone, shifting into a clinical presentation of facts. "What your parents failed to realize is that she never sold the commercial real estate those businesses occupied. She retained ownership of 3 prime corner lots in the downtown revitalization district. Over the last 2 decades, the property values in that specific sector skyrocketed." I stared at the thick folder. My parents had always painted Helen as a struggling widow who barely scraped by. Brenda used that narrative to justify her own supposed sacrifices when managing the funeral costs. 3 years before she died, Helen removed those properties from her standard will, Marcus explained. She knew that if she left them in the primary estate, Brenda would liquidate them as the executor and take the proceeds. So Helen hired an independent wealth management firm to draft an ironclad private blind trust. She transferred the deeds to the commercial lots directly into that structure. He tapped the cover of the folder with his index finger. "The primary beneficiary of that blind trust is you, Abigail. Only you. And because it was structured as a blind instrument outside of the standard probate process, your mother had no legal authority to access the itemized inventory. Brenda could see that a trust existed, but she could not see what was inside it." My breath caught in my throat. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling desert city, trying to process the magnitude of the revelation. "How much are the properties worth?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Marcus opened the folder to the final page, revealing a certified appraisal conducted just 6 weeks ago. The current market valuation of the commercial trust is $8.2 million, he stated. The number hung in the chilled air of the conference room. $8.2 million. My parents had risked state prison, forged my signature, and destroyed our bloodline for $850,000 in liquid cash. They had sold their souls for pennies, while an empire sat quietly in the dark, waiting for me to claim it. "Helen did not leave you a simple blessing," Marcus said, leaning back in his leather chair. "She left you an institution. She built a financial fortress that your mother could not breach." He reached into his suit jacket pocket and withdrew a small ivory envelope. The edges were slightly worn. He placed it carefully on the glass desk and slid it across the smooth surface toward me. "The trustee who manages the commercial properties was instructed to hold this until you formally initiated the claim process," Marcus said. "When I pulled the unredacted files this morning, the trustee verified your identity and authorized me to deliver it." I reached out and picked up the envelope. My name was written on the front in familiar, elegant cursive. It was Helen's handwriting. I opened the seal and pulled out a single piece of heavy cardstock. The ink was faded, but the message was clear and deliberate. "For my only honest girl," the note read. "I see how hard you work, while the rest of them take. The cash in the primary accounts is bait. Let them fight over the scraps. This trust is your foundation. Do not let them manage you." I read the brief sentences 3 times. A sharp ache tightened my chest, replacing the cold detachment I had maintained for the past 24 hours. The emotional weight of the paper was staggering. For my entire life, I assumed my silent labor was invisible. I thought working night shifts, balancing my parents' checkbooks, and absorbing their stress went entirely unnoticed by everyone. Helen saw it. She saw me rationing grocery money while Vanessa received handouts. She recognized Brenda's relentless greed and Richard's passive complicity. My grandmother had orchestrated a brilliant strategic maneuver from her deathbed. She left the liquid cash exposed, knowing Brenda would inevitably steal it, keeping her distracted. Meanwhile, Helen quietly secured an $8 million future for the one granddaughter who never asked for a dime. I traced the faded ink of my grandmother's signature. A profound sense of gratitude washed over me. She had handed me the exact weapon I needed to break the cycle. I am ready to claim the trust, I said, looking up at Marcus. How do we execute the transfer? The sharp analytical focus in his eyes hardened. The atmosphere in the room shifted, returning to the grim reality of legal warfare. There is a severe structural complication, Marcus warned, folding his hands on the desk. Your mother is a cunning executor. She may not have known what was inside the blind trust, but she knew she could not control it. To protect her theft of the liquid cash, she filed a blanket poison pill clause during the final probate proceedings. He pulled a separate document from the stack and highlighted a dense paragraph of legalese. Brenda filed a rigid executor mandate, Marcus explained, tracing the highlighted text with his pen. The clause dictates that the independent trustee cannot disperse any assets from the secondary blind trust until the primary estate is formally and legally sealed. And the primary estate cannot be legally sealed until every beneficiary signs a comprehensive release indemnifying the executor. I stared at the highlighted paragraph. The trap Brenda had built was infinitely more complex than a simple retroactive forgery. She anchored the blind trust to the primary estate I deduced, my mind racing through the financial logic. She is holding the $8 million hostage without even realizing how much it is worth. Precisely, Marcus confirmed. That retroactive waiver she tried to force you to sign yesterday in Henderson's gated community is the key to both vaults. He laid the situation out with surgical precision. If you sign the fraudulent waiver, you satisfy the poison pill clause. The primary estate officially closes, the independent trustee is released from the mandate, and you inherit $8.2 million in commercial real estate. You become wealthy beyond measure. But by signing that waiver, you legally validate your parents' theft. You immunize Brenda and Richard from prosecution. You assume the federal tax burden for the stolen $850,000, and you let them walk away unpunished. I looked down at Helen's handwritten note. Do not let them manage you. What is the alternative? I asked, my voice dropping to a low whisper. The alternative requires burning the entire structure to the ground, Marcus replied, leaning forward. If you refuse to sign the waiver, the primary estate remains open and the blind trust remains frozen. The only legal mechanism to sever Brenda's poison pill clause and bypass her executor authority is to formally contest her fitness to serve. We have to file a criminal fraud report with the district attorney. We have to submit the forged check, the fraudulent notary stamp, and the coercive text messages to the authorities. He let the gravity of the choice settle over the glass desk. You cannot unlock the $8 million quietly, Abigail. To claim your inheritance, you must orchestrate the felony indictment of your mother, your father, and your sister. You have to send your own family to prison. I sat in the quiet conference room, clutching the ivory cardstock. The neon lights of the Las Vegas Strip were just turning off in the early morning sun outside the window. The moral arithmetic was brutal. Peace bought with a lie is not peace at all. It is just another form of subjugation. My family had expected me to fold. They expected the tired night auditor to shrink away from the conflict and accept the scraps they deemed appropriate. Prepare the fraud report, I instructed, placing Helen's note safely into my pocket. Draft the formal demand letter and compile the evidence for the district attorney. Marcus nodded, his expression reflecting a deep professional respect. I will have the filings ready by Monday morning. I can have a process server deliver the notices to their respective residences. No, I said, standing up and retrieving my canvas tote bag. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a new text message from Brenda. She was demanding I attend a mandatory family dinner on Sunday evening to hand over the signed paperwork. She was issuing a final summons. I am not sending a process server, I told Marcus, meeting his cold stare with one of my own. I am going to deliver the news myself. I left the polished glass conference room and navigated my 12-year-old sedan through the morning traffic of the financial district. The desert sun was climbing higher, baking the asphalt and pushing the ambient temperature past 90 degrees before 9 o'clock. The broken air conditioning in my car blew a steady stream of hot air against my face. I possessed a certified appraisal stating I was the sole beneficiary of an $8 million commercial real estate portfolio, but I still had to calculate whether I could afford enough gasoline to make it home. My studio apartment was located on the second floor of a decaying stucco building on the eastern edge of the city. I unlocked the deadbolt and pushed the heavy wooden door open. The interior was suffocating. The window air conditioning unit rattled violently, struggling to combat the relentless Nevada heat. The cramped space smelled faintly of stale carpet and old drywall. I did not turn on the overhead lights. The dim sunlight filtering through the cheap plastic blinds was enough. I walked over to the small laminate kitchen table and emptied the contents of my canvas tote bag. I placed the automated tax audit from the Internal Revenue Service on the left side of the table. I set the fraudulent retroactive indemnity waiver Brenda wanted me to sign on the right. In the center, I carefully positioned the ivory envelope containing the handwritten note from my grandmother, Helen. I pulled out my yellow legal pad and a pen. I sat down in the silence of the dark apartment and began to perform the moral arithmetic of my own life. Marcus Thorne had laid out the legal mechanics with surgical precision. The choice in front of me was binary and brutal. Option A represented the path of least resistance. If I signed my name on the blank line of Brenda's waiver, the primary estate would officially close. The poison pill clause would be satisfied. The independent trustee would transfer the deeds of the prime Reno real estate into my name. I would instantly become a multimillionaire. Mathematically, option A was highly seductive. Even if I assumed the federal tax penalty for the $850,000 my parents stole the revenue generated by the commercial properties would cover the debt easily, I could pay the IRS out of pocket, walk away wealthy, and never speak to my bloodline again. But the psychological cost of option A was absolute surrender. Signing that waiver meant I was legally validating their forgery. It meant granting them total immunity for a felony. Brenda and Richard would keep their stolen cash. Vanessa would keep her custom Henderson mansion, funded by my silent labor. They would spend the rest of their lives believing they had successfully outsmarted the system. They would view my signature as a final submission, confirming their lifelong assumption that Abigail Mitchell exists solely to absorb their liabilities. I traced the faded ink on Helen's cardstock. For my only honest girl, do not let them manage you. I looked at option B. Option B was the nuclear protocol. If I refused to sign the waiver, the blind trust remained frozen. The only way to bypass the executor mandate was to formally contest Brenda's fitness to serve by filing a criminal fraud report. Executing option B required me to actively facilitate the prosecution of my own family. I would have to hand the forged check, the fraudulent notary stamp, and the coercive text messages directly to the district attorney. The state of Nevada does not offer leniency for coordinated estate theft. Richard would face a judge. Vanessa and her college roommate would be indicted for wire fraud. Brenda, the architect of the entire conspiracy, would face consecutive prison sentences. I sat in the sweltering heat listening to the mechanical rattle of the window unit. I thought about the decades of conditioning I had endured. From a very young age, I was trained to be the shock absorber for the Mitchell family. When Richard lost his temper over a missed utility payment, I took a second job to cover the deficit. When Vanessa wrecked her first car, I drained my meager savings to pay her insurance deductible so Brenda would not have to worry. I was groomed to carry their burdens. They built an entire domestic ecosystem relying on my passive compliance. The theft of my inheritance was simply the ultimate manifestation of that dynamic. They did not view stealing from me as a crime. They viewed it as their inherent right. I stared at the yellow legal pad. If I took the quiet money and signed the waiver, I would be wealthy, but I would still be their victim. I would be purchasing my freedom with a lie. And peace bought with a lie is not peace at all. It is just a well-funded hostage situation. My grandmother had intentionally structured this test. Helen knew Brenda would try to loot the accounts. She left the liquid cash exposed as bait to reveal their true nature. She gave me the commercial trust, not just as a financial reward, but as an instrument of justice. She wanted me to stop being the compliant daughter. I picked up my cellular phone and dialed the direct line to Marcus Thorne's private office. He answered on the second ring. "I have made my decision," I stated, my voice flat and devoid of hesitation. "We are not settling. We are not signing the waiver." "I understand," Marcus replied, his tone reflecting a grim professional approval. "I will finalize the criminal fraud report and compile the evidence binders for the district attorney. I will also draft a formal demand letter notifying the executor that her authority is under legal contest. We can dispatch a courier to serve them the paperwork by Monday afternoon." I looked down at the forged indemnity waiver resting on my kitchen table. Sending a courier was the standard legal procedure. It was safe and sterile. But a courier would allow Brenda to control the narrative. She would open the envelope in private, spin a new web of lies, and immediately begin transferring funds to offshore accounts or hiding assets. "Do not send a courier," I instructed, gripping the phone tightly. "I want you to prepare the physical documents and place them in a single folder. I will come to your office tomorrow to pick them up." Marcus paused, analyzing the tactical deviation. Abigail confronting a cornered narcissist is dangerous. When they realize the trap has snapped shut, their behavior becomes highly unpredictable. "I am not going to argue with them," I replied. "I am simply going to deliver the audit. They spent my entire life writing my script. I am going to read the final page to their faces." "Very well," Marcus said. "The documents will be ready for your collection tomorrow." I ended the call and placed the device back onto the table. The moral arithmetic was complete. The ledger was balanced. The family I thought I belonged to was officially deceased, replaced by 3 hostile targets in a financial investigation. I walked into my cramped bathroom and splashed cold tap water onto my face, trying to wash away the exhaustion of the night shift. I needed to sleep. I needed my mind sharp for the impending collision. Before I could reach the small mattress in the corner of the studio, my phone buzzed against the laminate table. The sudden vibration sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet apartment. I walked back and picked up the device. A new text message had arrived. It was from Brenda. She had abandoned the sickly sweet manipulation she attempted in Henderson's gated community. Her tone had shifted into rigid, authoritarian command. The smear campaign, orchestrated through the extended relatives, was meant to soften my defenses. Now she was moving in to close the deal. "We are done playing games, Abigail," the message read. "Your father and I are hosting a mandatory family dinner this Sunday at 5 in the evening. Vanessa will be there. You will bring the signed tax waiver. We are putting this nonsense behind us. Do not test my patience." I stared at the glowing screen. She was summoning me to the executioner's block, expecting me to hand over the axe. She anticipated that the pressure of the angry voicemails and the coordinated isolation would break my resolve. She expected the tired, struggling night auditor to walk into her dining room, lower her head, and surrender the $8 million future she did not even know existed. I typed my response using slow, deliberate keystrokes. I did not offer an excuse. I did not mention the migraine or the county clerk. I will be there. Sunday evening arrived with a stifling dry heat that baked the concrete sidewalks of my parents' subdivision. I drove my aging sedan through the curved streets of their neighborhood, listening to the engine rattle against the quiet hum of central air conditioning units powering the surrounding houses. The properties here were immaculate, featuring pristine stucco facades and xeriscaped front yards. I parked on the street directly behind Vanessa's gleaming white luxury sport utility vehicle. I turned off the ignition and sat in the quiet cabin for a moment. I reached across the passenger seat and picked up my heavy leather tote bag. Inside the main compartment rested a thick, sealed folder prepared by Marcus Thorne. It contained the forensic paper trail of a felony alongside a formal legal demand notifying the executor of a criminal contest. I slung the strap over my shoulder, stepped out into the evening sun, and walked up the paved driveway. I pressed the doorbell. A melodic chime echoed inside the residence. Brenda opened the door within seconds. She was wearing a tailored silk blouse in a soft shade of emerald green. Her hair was freshly styled, and her posture radiated the stiff, artificial warmth of a seasoned hostess welcoming a difficult guest. "Abigail," she said, her voice pitched a half-octave higher than normal, "come inside. You are just in time." I stepped over the threshold into the foyer. The ambient temperature was a crisp 68 degrees, a sharp contrast to the blistering environment outside. The air smelled of roasted garlic, seared butter, and expensive floral arrangements. Brenda did not offer a hug. She simply turned on her heel and marched toward the formal dining room, expecting me to follow her obediently. For 3 decades, Sunday dinner in this house was never a mechanism for family bonding. It functioned as a domestic courtroom where Brenda served as judge and jury. These gatherings were performance reviews designed to highlight Vanessa's achievements while dissecting my supposed shortcomings. Tonight, the protocol remained unchanged. They had summoned me to this specific room to secure my final surrender under the guise of shared hospitality. I walked into the dining area. The space was illuminated by a modern crystal chandelier casting a warm golden glow over a massive mahogany table. Vanessa was already seated near the window. She wore a designer linen sundress and held a delicate stemmed glass filled with dark red liquid. She was scrolling through her cellular phone but paused when I entered. She offered me a pitying, tight-lipped smile. It was the expression of a wealthy patron humoring a destitute relative. She possessed the effortless arrogance of a woman who believed her recent real estate purchase and sudden influx of cash were the result of her own merit rather than a coordinated theft. Richard stood near a polished wooden credenza, uncorking a fresh bottle of wine. He wore pressed slacks and a collared shirt. He did not meet my eyes. He focused entirely on twisting the corkscrew, his shoulders drawn tight with nervous tension. He was the silent accomplice, relying on his wife to execute the unsavory details of their shared conspiracy. "Take a seat, Abby," Brenda instructed, pointing to a chair positioned directly across from Vanessa. I pulled the heavy wooden chair back and sat down. I placed my leather tote bag carefully on the floor next to my feet, keeping the strap within easy reach. I looked at the surface of the mahogany table. It was set with their finest china, imported silver flatware, and crisp linen napkins folded into precise geometric shapes. In the center of the table sat a lavish catered feast, arranged on warming platters. There were thick cuts of dry-aged filet mignon, roasted asparagus spears drizzled in hollandaise sauce, and a mountain of truffle mashed potatoes. Next to the food rested 3 bottles of premium Bordeaux wine. My professional training as a night auditor kicked in automatically. I calculated the retail cost of the items displayed in front of me. The dry-aged steaks from a high-end local chop house ran at least $70 per portion. The imported truffle sides added another $100. The 3 bottles of vintage Bordeaux easily exceeded $400. The floral centerpiece likely cost another $100. Brenda and Richard were retired. They lived on a fixed pension and Social Security benefits. Before my grandmother Helen died, a spread like this would have been financially impossible for them. They used to serve generic pasta and cheap domestic beer on Sundays, complaining about the rising cost of groceries. I stared at the medium-rare beef and the crystal wine glasses. I realized with clinical clarity that I was paying for this meal. The $850,000 they siphoned from my inheritance funded the catered steak, the premium vintage wine, and the silk blouse my mother was wearing. They had stolen my future to elevate their standard of living, and now they were using the spoils of that theft to host a dinner designed to force my legal submission. I poured myself a glass of tap water from a standard pitcher, avoiding the expensive wine. Richard brought the open bottle to the table, filling Brenda's glass and topping off Vanessa's drink. He took his seat at the head of the mahogany table, clearing his throat. The tension in the room was palpable, vibrating beneath the surface of the curated elegance. While Brenda began clasping her manicured hands together, resting them on the pristine linen tablecloth, she deployed her signature management tone. It was a sickly sweet cadence, engineered to sound reasonable while demanding total compliance. I think it is best if we handle our little administrative chore before we serve the food. Let us get the unpleasant paperwork out of the way so we can enjoy a nice, peaceful evening as a family. She reached into a nearby drawer, pulling out a fresh, crisp copy of the retroactive indemnity waiver. She must have printed a duplicate, assuming I would claim I forgot the original document at my apartment. She slid the paper across the polished wood. It stopped right next to my water glass. Then she retrieved the same heavy gold pen Richard had nervously tapped against the counter in Henderson's gated community yesterday. She placed the writing instrument directly on top of the blank signature line. "Just a quick signature," Abigail Brenda coaxed, tilting her head with a patronizing smile. "We have a busy week ahead, and your father needs to drop this off at the county clerk office tomorrow morning. Let us close the book on your grandmother's estate so we can all move forward." Vanessa took a slow sip of her red wine, swirling the liquid in the bowl of her glass. "Seriously, Abby," she chimed in, her tone dripping with bored condescension. "Just sign the stupid thing. Mom has been stressing over these tax forms for days. You always make everything so difficult. Just do them this one favor so we can eat." Richard remained silent, staring intently at a roasted asparagus spear on the serving platter. He was waiting for me to fold, just as I had folded every other time they demanded my silent labor. They expected the tired, struggling night auditor to pick up the gold pen, lower her head, and surrender. They anticipated that the social pressure of the formal dining room, combined with their unified front, would crush any residual resistance. They viewed me as a delinquent child requiring stern guidance to execute a menial task. I did not touch the heavy gold pen. I did not look at the fraudulent waiver. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the condescension and the fabricated impatience. The air conditioning hummed in the background. My heart rate remained steady. I felt the cold, metallic calm of a ledger snapping into balance. I reached down to the floor, gripping the zipper of my leather tote bag. I pulled the metal tab, sliding it open with a sharp, continuous rasp that cut through the quiet dining room. I reached inside and retrieved the thick, sealed folder Marcus Thorne had prepared. I lifted it out of the bag and placed it squarely on top of the immaculate linen tablecloth covering the blank signature line of their retroactive waiver. Brenda's patronizing smile faltered. Her eyes darted to the unmarked folder. "What is that?" she demanded, her management tone fracturing slightly. I kept my hands resting flat on the mahogany surface, holding her gaze with cold, unblinking focus. "I did not bring the waiver," I said, my voice low, even, and carrying the sterile precision of a courtroom verdict. "I brought the audit." I reached across the mahogany table and flipped the thick cardboard cover of the folder open. The heavy cardstock hit the wood with a dull, commanding thud. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to shout or scream to dismantle their curated reality. I let the paper execute the confrontation for me. My fingers found the first document resting at the top of the stack. It was a high-resolution, color printout of the canceled county disbursement check provided by Marcus Thorne. I slid the glossy page over the pristine linen tablecloth, stopping it right beside the catered filet mignon. "Exhibit A," I announced, my tone mirroring the flat, clinical cadence I utilize when presenting a daily revenue discrepancy to a resort manager. A certified draft for $850,000 drawn from Helen Mitchell's estate, payable to Abigail Mitchell. The reverse side shows an endorsement routed directly into a joint brokerage account controlled by Brenda and Richard. Above that specific deposit block sits my signature, a signature I never provided. Richard stopped staring at the roasted asparagus spears. His head snapped upward. The remaining color drained rapidly from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. He looked like a weary man who had just stepped off a high ledge and was simply waiting for the concrete to arrive. Brenda's forced hostess smile evaporated instantly. The underlying architecture of her face hardened into something angular, rigid, and remarkably cold. She opened her mouth to speak, seeking to intercept the accusation, but I held up my palm, silencing her before she could construct a preliminary lie. I pulled the second piece of paper from the file. It was an enlarged forensic scan of the retroactive release form they submitted to the probate court 2 years ago. I placed it directly next to the canceled check, aligning the edges with geometric precision. Exhibit B. I continued maintaining my steady, measured auditory rhythm. The initial waiver releasing the executor from all financial liability. At the bottom margin, we see another traced counterfeit of my handwriting. But the truly fascinating element is the official authentication. A sworn state officer verified this fraudulent document. I tapped my index finger against the blue circular ink pressed near the signature line. The notary public of record is Jessica Rollins First, stated, directing my gaze specifically toward my sister. Your college roommate, Vanessa, the silent partner funding your new luxury boutique. She affixed her official state seal to a falsified legal document authenticating the physical presence of a woman who was 50 miles away working a casino audit shift. Vanessa froze. Her manicured fingers tightened around the slender stem of her crystal glass. The profound ignorance that usually shielded her from consequence shattered into jagged fragments. The sudden, horrifying realization that her closest confidant was implicated in a state-level felony broke her cultivated composure. Her hand trembled violently. The delicate wine vessel slipped from her grip and collided with the mahogany table. It hit the polished wood far too hard. The sharp clink of shattering crystal rang through the dining room. A deep crimson wave of vintage Bordeaux splashed across the immaculate white napkin, spreading like a fresh wound over the expensive fabric. The dark liquid dripped down the beveled edge of the table, pooling onto the imported rug below. Nobody moved to clean the mess. The ringing silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the steady mechanical hum of the central air conditioning and the rhythmic dripping of spilled alcohol. I withdrew the third and final document. It was a comprehensive financial timeline drafted by my attorney. It tracked every illicit transaction, identifying exactly how the misappropriated funds migrated through various banking institutions. I laid the spreadsheet face up, smoothing the corners flat. Exhibit C, I whispered, letting the finality of the paper settle over the ruined dinner. The money trail. I looked at the 3 people sitting around the lavish, catered feast. They were trapped inside a meticulously decorated cage of their own design. The physical evidence was undeniable, leaving zero room for interpretation or plausible deniability. The scent of roasted garlic and seared butter mingled with the metallic tang of fear. I am going to explain exactly how this operation worked, I told them, leaning back into the sturdy frame of my wooden chair. I want you to hear it out loud, so there is no confusion regarding what the district attorney will review. 2 years ago, Helen passed away. Brenda assumed control as the acting executor. You discovered a substantial liquid cash reserve and decided the daughter who worked nights did not deserve her designated share. You counterfeited my handwriting to bypass the probate court oversight. You leveraged Vanessa's best friend to illegally notarize the theft, avoiding any external scrutiny. I shifted my focus to my father. You, Richard, deposited that falsified check into your premier wealth management account. You sat across from a bank teller and presented stolen property as legitimate retirement income. You used my future to buy metal credit cards and designer silk blouses. You watched me struggle to pay for basic vehicle maintenance while you generated passive interest off my inheritance. Then I turned my attention back to the golden child. Her eyes were wide fixated on the spreading wine stain destroying the rug. And you, Vanessa, were the ultimate laundering mechanism. Brenda and Richard could not spend nearly $1 million quickly without drawing unwanted suspicion. So they washed a massive portion of the capital through your elevated lifestyle. They handed you hundreds of thousands of dollars, framing the transfer as a generous family gift. You used my stolen wealth to purchase a custom desert mansion in cash. You paid for your imported Italian pool tiles and your negative edge oasis using the exact resources I was supposed to receive. I rested my hands on my lap, feeling the steady, rhythmic pulse of my own heartbeat. The clinical breakdown of their crime hung over the dining table, suffocating the festive atmosphere they had tried to enforce. I had systematically dismantled their false narrative using nothing but ink and chronological facts. The architecture of their grand deception lay in ruins among the truffle potatoes and dry-aged beef. There was a brief moment where the trajectory of the evening could have shifted. A normal family confronted with the undeniable proof of a devastating betrayal might have broken down. A father might have apologized for his profound cowardice. A sister might have wept in genuine remorse, recognizing the extreme cost of her unearned luxury. A mother might have begged for forgiveness, realizing she had destroyed her bloodline for temporary financial gain. But the Mitchell family was not normal. They operated on a fundamentally different psychological frequency. Empathy was a foreign language they refused to learn. Richard remained paralyzed, incapable of formulating a coherent defense. His jaw worked silently, but no words emerged. Vanessa continued staring at the broken crystal glass, hyperventilating, as the severe legal implications of her roommate's involvement began to crystallize in her mind. Her chest heaved, drawing shallow, panicked breaths. Brenda, however, did not retreat. A true narcissist never apologizes when presented with their own reflection. If the mirror shows a monster, they simply attack the glass. She stared at the forensic timeline resting next to her expensive meal. The veins in her neck pulsed with erratic rhythm. Her hands gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning a pale ivory. The artificial warmth she had projected earlier was entirely gone, replaced by a predatory, venomous fury. She realized her control over me was permanently severed. The obedient shock absorber had mutated into an existential threat to her freedom. She took a slow, deep breath, inflating her lungs to full capacity. She lifted her chin, leveling a glare filled with concentrated hatred directly at my face. She did not express regret for forging my name. She did not show any remorse for leaving me holding a federal tax notice in a sweltering parking garage. She felt no shame for stealing the foundation of my life. Instead, she geared up for war. She prepared to defend her theft not with evidence, but with a vicious, emotional assault designed to tear my character apart. The truth was laid bare on the pristine linen, but Brenda was about to prove that a cornered thief is far more dangerous than a hidden one. Brenda did not weep. She did not beg for forgiveness. She weaponized her panic and transformed it into a blistering verbal assault. She stood up so quickly her heavy wooden dining chair scraped harshly against the imported rug. She planted both manicured hands flat on the mahogany table, leaning aggressively over the ruined dinner. Her breathing was heavy and erratic. I sat perfectly still. I watched the transformation with the detached clinical interest of an auditor reviewing a fraudulent ledger. When a narcissist is cornered by undeniable physical evidence, they do not experience guilt. They experience a profound sense of injury. In Brenda's mind, I was not the victim of a felony. I was a malicious aggressor who had rudely interrupted her catered Sunday meal. "You ungrateful child," Brenda hissed. Her voice abandoned the sickly sweet management tone and dropped into a guttural snarl. "You march into my home and accuse us of theft? We raised you. We fed you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. Do you have any concept of what that cost us? That money was not stolen, Abigail. It was owed. It was back pay for decades of sacrifice." She was rewriting the financial reality in real time. She was attempting to reclassify an $850,000 grand larceny as a delayed parental reimbursement. It was a staggering display of cognitive dissonance. She truly believed that providing basic shelter during my childhood entitled her to forge my signature and loot my inheritance. Richard watched his wife explode. His passive complicity finally cracked under the weight of the physical evidence sitting on the table. He looked at the forensic timeline I had printed. He realized that piece of paper was a roadmap straight to a federal indictment. His self-preservation instincts overrode his paralyzing cowardice. He lunged across the table. His arm knocked over a crystal water pitcher, sending a cascade of ice and liquid across the truffle potatoes and the dry-aged beef. He aimed his grasping fingers directly at the forensic spreadsheet. I anticipated the physical escalation. I did not flinch or react with sudden panic. I smoothly placed my palm flat against the cardboard folder and slid it backward, pulling it seamlessly out of his reach. I lifted the entire stack of documents and dropped them safely back into my heavy leather tote bag, securing the zipper. Richard hit the edge of the mahogany table, breathing hard. His attempt to destroy the evidence had failed, leaving him looking pathetic and desperate, dripping with spilled ice water. He retreated to his chair, staring at his wet hands in total defeat. Brenda ignored her husband's failed maneuver. Her fury was entirely focused on me. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face. The emerald silk of her blouse trembled with her rage. "You did not need it," Brenda screamed. The volume of her voice echoed off the high ceilings of the formal dining room. "You never ask for anything. You live in a shoebox apartment because you choose to. You work night shifts because you refuse to apply yourself. You pride yourself on needing nothing from anyone. Why should we hand you a fortune when you have no idea how to live properly?" The sheer audacity of her statement settled over the room like ash. She was weaponizing my independence against me. She had forced me to become entirely self-reliant by constantly redirecting familial resources to my sister. Now she was using the survival skills I developed in response to her neglect as the primary justification for robbing me. She was blaming the victim for being too resilient to notice the theft. "Vanessa needs support," Brenda continued, gesturing wildly toward the golden child. "Vanessa has a family to think about. She has a brand new business to run. She required capital to establish a proper foundation. We distributed Helen's assets according to who actually required the assistance. We did what a family is supposed to do. We protected the vulnerable." I sat motionless, allowing the verbal abuse to wash over me. I did not defend my choices. I did not explain that I lived in a cramped, un-air-conditioned studio because I was aggressively paying down the medical debt they refused to help me with years ago. I did not mention the nights I ate cheap canned soup so I could afford to maintain my aging sedan. Arguing with her twisted logic would grant her the validation of a debate. I refused to participate in her delusion. I simply observed the scene. Richard was broken and silent. Brenda was vibrating with manufactured righteous indignation. Vanessa was still staring at the shattered crystal wine glass, her chest heaving as the reality of her own criminal exposure set in. The catered food grew cold on the serving platters, surrounded by spilled wine and melting ice. Brenda paced behind her chair, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor beyond the rug. "You think you can walk in here and threaten us with a county clerk printout?" she mocked, her tone dripping with venom. "Go ahead and call the authorities, Abigail. Tell them your mother reimbursed herself for raising a miserable, ungrateful daughter. Tell them we helped your sister secure a home. Any judge in this state will laugh you out of the courtroom. We protected this family. You are trying to destroy it over pure greed." She finally paused to draw a ragged breath. She had exhausted her immediate reserve of adrenaline. She stood there, waiting for my rebuttal. She wanted me to cry. She wanted me to scream and throw my own insults. She desperately needed me to match her hysterical energy so she could label me as the unstable aggressor. I denied her the satisfaction. The silence in the dining room stretched for a long, agonizing minute. The only sounds were the dripping water from the overturned pitcher and Vanessa's shallow, terrified breathing. I turned my head slowly, shifting my gaze away from the pacing narcissist. I locked my eyes strictly onto my younger sister. Vanessa had always operated under the assumption that she was the center of our parents' universe. She believed the fraudulent influx of cash was a testament to their unwavering devotion to her success. She thought she was the primary beneficiary of their crime. It was time to introduce her to the mathematics of parental greed. "You heard her, Vanessa," I said, my voice low, and dangerously calm. Brenda just stated she distributed Helen's assets according to who actually required the assistance. She claims they stole my inheritance strictly to provide you with a proper foundation. Vanessa swallowed hard. She nodded slowly, her eyes darting between me and our mother. She was clinging to Brenda's narrative because it absolved her of ultimate responsibility. If the parents orchestrated the felony solely to rescue their favorite daughter, then Vanessa could maintain her role as the passive, innocent recipient. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the edge of the table. Let us review the accounting I continued, ensuring every syllable was articulate and precise. The certified check routed from the probate court into their premier brokerage account was for exactly $850,000. I saw the closing documents on your new custom property in Henderson. You purchased the estate in cash. The county records list the final sale price at $300,000. I paused, letting the numeric values hang in the air. Vanessa was not an auditor, but even she possessed the basic cognitive capacity to perform simple subtraction. I watched her process the calculation. Her brow furrowed. The initial shock of the forgery revelation was rapidly being replaced by a different kind of horror. If our parents stole $850,000 in the name of securing your future, I said, maintaining steady, unrelenting eye contact with my sister, why did they only give you $300,000? The question functioned like a precision explosive. It detonated silently inside the dining room, severing the fragile alliance the criminals had built. Vanessa blinked rapidly. She looked at me and then turned her head to stare at Brenda. The math was undeniable. There was a discrepancy of $550,000. Mom Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling with confusion and rising panic. What is Abigail talking about? You told me Grandma's blessing was only a few $100,000. You said you gave me everything that was left after the funeral expenses. Brenda froze. Her pacing stopped abruptly. The righteous indignation vanished, replaced by the stark, naked terror of a thief caught hoarding stolen goods from her own accomplice. She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. She glanced at Richard, pleading for intervention, but he remained staring at his wet hands, completely paralyzed. I did not let Brenda formulate a new lie. I drove the wedge deeper, splitting the foundation of their conspiracy wide open. They kept the rest, I stated, presenting the fact with brutal simplicity. They forged my signature to steal nearly $1 million. They handed you a fraction of the proceeds to buy your silence and ensure you would sign whatever retroactive tax waivers they placed in front of you. They used you to launder a small portion of the capital while they parked $550,000 into a high-yield wealth management fund. They have been generating passive interest off my stolen inheritance and your blind loyalty for 2 years. Vanessa stood up. Her chair tipped backward and crashed onto the hardwood floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. She looked at her mother. The woman who had coddled her, excused her failures, and funded her lifestyle had secretly skimmed $500,000 off the top of a felony they committed together. The golden child realized she was not the primary motivation for the crime. She was just a convenient shield. Is it true, Vanessa demanded, her voice rising into a hysterical pitch. Did you keep $500,000 while I was stressing over contractor invoices and inventory costs? You let my best friend risk her notary license for a fraction of the payout. Brenda took a step backward, raising her hands in a placating gesture. Vanessa, sweetheart, you do not understand business, she stammered, her confidence entirely shattered. Your father and I needed a cushion for our retirement. We had to manage the tax liabilities. We were going to trickle the rest down to you eventually. We were protecting the principal. Vanessa let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Protecting the principal. You lied to me. You let me thank you for a $300,000 house while you sat on $500,000. The thieves were falling out. The unified front they planned to use against me had completely disintegrated. They were no longer focused on forcing me to sign the retroactive indemnity waiver. They were entirely consumed by their own internal betrayal. They were fighting over the scraps of a liquid cash account entirely unaware of the financial structure sitting quietly in the dark. I watched them tear each other apart over $850,000. It was a pathetic display of insatiable greed. They had sacrificed their bloodline, their dignity, and their freedom for a fraction of my true net worth. I reached down and gripped the handle of my leather tote bag, preparing to deliver the final lethal blow. I was about to show them exactly what my grandmother had built, for the daughter who never asked for anything. The echo of the heavy wooden chair striking the hardwood floor lingered in the formal dining room. Vanessa stood over the ruined meal, her chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. The golden child was finally experiencing the precise brand of betrayal I had endured my entire life. For 3 decades, she operated under the delusion that our parents possessed an infinite reservoir of generosity reserved exclusively for her benefit. I watched that synthetic reality dissolve right in front of my eyes. She reached into her designer handbag resting on the adjacent seat. She pulled out her cellular phone. Her fingers shook as she bypassed the security lock screen and opened her mobile banking application. The blue glow of the interface illuminated her pale face, contrasting sharply with the warm ambient lighting of the crystal chandelier overhead. She scrolled through her transaction history, navigating back to the previous autumn when the initial deposits occurred. She was searching for the specific wire transfers originating from Brenda's premier brokerage account. I sat quietly and allowed her to perform the mathematics. A deep, corrosive silence settled over the room. The only auditory input was the soft, rapid swiping of Vanessa's thumb against the glass screen and the steady dripping of vintage Bordeaux onto the imported rug. She found the ledger entries. Her facial expression twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. The numerical truth stared back at her from the digital display. $300,000. It was a substantial sum of capital, but it represented a fractional sliver of the stolen inheritance. "You kept $550,000, Vanessa whispered. Her tone carried a hollow, haunted ring. She looked away from the glowing device and locked her eyes onto our mother. "You let me believe this was a generous miracle. You let me cry and thank you for saving my business. You were skimming $500,000 off my back." Brenda recoiled as if she had been physically struck. Her maternal facade crumbled, revealing the calculating architect beneath. She hated being challenged, especially by the offspring she had carefully molded into a compliant dependent. "Do not use that tone with me," Brenda snapped, adjusting the collar of her emerald silk blouse. "We did not skim anything. Your father and I managed a highly complex financial transition. We assumed the primary risk. We handled the probate filings. We dealt with the county clerk. We provided you with a debt-free estate in one of the most expensive zip codes in Nevada. You should be dropping to your knees in gratitude instead of questioning our accounting practices." "Gratitude," Vanessa shrieked. The pitch of her voice shattered the remaining decorum in the house. "You used me. You needed a place to dump the cash quickly so the federal government would not flag your accounts. You threw me a bone and kept the feast for yourselves." Richard finally attempted to intervene. He stood up, raising his hands in a desperate, placating gesture. "Girls, please," he pleaded, his voice lacking any actual authority. "We are a family. We need to lower our voices and figure out a solution before the neighbors hear us shouting." "Shut up, Dad," Vanessa retorted, dismissing him instantly. "You sat right there and signed the deposit slips. You let my best friend Jessica stamp a fraudulent document. Do you have any idea what will happen to her if the state investigates this paper trail? She will lose her notary license. She could face federal wire charges. You exposed my business partner to a felony just so you could buy a new luxury vehicle and drink expensive wine." The criminals were consuming each other. The unified front they had meticulously constructed to intimidate me was gone. They were no longer focused on forcing my signature onto the retroactive indemnity waiver. They were consumed by their own internal paranoia. Brenda stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and her favored child. If Jessica loses her credential, that is her own fault for not verifying the signature. Brenda hissed, her tone turning venomous. Do not stand there and pretend you are an innocent victim, Vanessa. You accepted the capital. You bought the house. You spent the funds. If we go down for estate fraud, you are coming down right alongside us as an accessory after the fact." The threat hung heavy over the catered feast. Mutually assured destruction. Brenda was willing to leverage her own daughter's legal liability to force compliance. She loved the stolen wealth far more than she loved her offspring. I remained seated in my chair observing the implosion. My heart rate was slow and steady. I felt the profound clinical satisfaction of an auditor watching a corrupt corporation liquidate itself. I did not need to shout. I did not need to hurl insults or demand apologies. I had simply placed 3 pieces of paper on a mahogany table and let the truth act as a corrosive agent. They were fighting over the scraps. They were destroying their relationships, their dignity, and their legal safety over an $850,000 checking account. They believed that specific pool of liquid cash represented the entire scope of the battlefield. They were unaware of the financial fortress sitting quietly in the dark, waiting for me to turn the key. Vanessa collapsed back into a different chair, burying her face in her hands. Dry sobs shook her shoulders. Richard sank into his seat, staring blankly at the ruined filet mignon. The room felt suffocating, thick with the toxic residue of shattered illusions. Brenda realized she had lost control of her inner circle. The golden child was compromised. The compliant husband was paralyzed. The only remaining target was the catalyst who had ignited the fire. She slowly turned her head. She locked her gaze onto me. Her eyes were devoid of any remaining humanity. They were cold, calculating, and filled with unadulterated spite. She recognized that her carefully curated life was unraveling, and she blamed me for pulling the thread. She placed both hands on the edge of the table, leaning toward me. She was preparing to deploy her final tactical maneuver. She wanted to assert dominance, to prove that even in defeat, she controlled the narrative. "You think you have won?" Brenda sneered, her voice dropping into a menacing whisper. "You think presenting a printed spreadsheet makes you a victor? You are nothing, Abigail. You are a night shift worker living in a miserable apartment." She pointed a trembling finger at the forensic timeline resting inside my leather tote bag. "Go ahead and file your little police report," she challenged, displaying a terrifying level of hubris. "Call the district attorney. Hire your expensive lawyers. We will deny everything. We will claim you authorized the signature verbally and changed your mind to extort us. We will hire the best defense attorneys in the state of Nevada. We will drag this out in probate court for a decade." She leaned closer, her face mere inches from the shattered crystal and the spilled wine. "By the time the legal fees drain the estate, there will be nothing left," she promised, her eyes flashing with malicious triumph. "We might lose a portion of the cash, but you will spend the next 10 years drowning in litigation. You get nothing, Abigail. You walk away with empty pockets. We will make sure you never see a single dime of your grandmother's money." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. She was threatening to burn the entire estate to ash just to ensure I could not claim my rightful share. She believed the $850,000 was the only asset available to dispute. She thought she was holding the ultimate trump card. For the first time since I discovered the federal tax audit in the sweltering parking garage, I felt a genuine physical shift in my demeanor. The cold stoicism I had maintained for days melted away. The corners of my mouth twitched. The muscles in my cheeks pulled upward. I sat in the dining room, surrounded by ruined food and shattered glass, and I finally smiled. My smile was not a reaction of joy. It was the physical manifestation of total systemic victory. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire existence treating me as an expendable asset. Brenda stood there breathing heavily, believing she held the ultimate leverage. She assumed the battlefield was limited to the liquid cash she had successfully siphoned. She was threatening to burn a checking account to the ground, oblivious to the fortress looming directly behind her. I placed my palms flat against the edge of the mahogany table and pushed my chair backward. The wooden legs scraped softly against the imported rug. I stood up, rising to my full height. The shift in elevation altered the physical dynamic of the room. I was no longer the subordinate daughter receiving a lecture. I was the auditor delivering the final assessment. "You are not going to drag anything out in probate court," I stated, my voice carrying a quiet, ringing resonance. Probate courts handle civil disputes regarding administrative errors and contested wills. We are far past civil litigation. I reached down into my leather tote bag, keeping my movements unhurried and precise. "The paperwork detailing your forgery and the corresponding bank transfers is no longer in my exclusive possession," I explained, withdrawing a fresh, crisp envelope. "My attorney, Marcus Thorne, filed a comprehensive criminal fraud report with the district attorney this morning. The authorities are not going to debate your parental sacrifices or your retirement cushion. They are going to audit the routing numbers. They are going to subpoena the notary log belonging to Vanessa's business partner. The criminal process is already in motion, and you cannot stall a felony indictment by hiring expensive defense lawyers." Brenda's confident posture faltered. The threat of immediate criminal exposure pierced through her armor of arrogance. The idea that a prosecutor was already reviewing her bank records stripped away her remaining leverage. But the liquid cash was never the primary objective. I continued shifting my focus away from the stolen $850,000. That specific account was a distraction. It was a litmus test designed by a woman who understood exactly how your mind operates. I pulled a thick, bound document from the envelope. It was not a printed spreadsheet or a scanned check. It was a certified legal instrument bearing the official seal of an independent wealth management firm. "Grandmother Helen knew you were a thief," I said, presenting the fact without any emotional inflection. "She recognized your greed decades ago. She knew that if she left her true assets unprotected, you would exploit your position as executor to liquidate everything. So she left the cash accounts exposed. She handed you the bait, knowing you lacked the discipline to ignore it. She let you steal the loose change to keep you occupied." I held the bound document over the center of the ruined dinner, setting it down gently on the pristine white linen. "While you were busy counterfeiting my signature to secure a fraction of her net worth, Helen quietly removed her primary holdings from the Standard estate," I explained. "She transferred the deeds to her commercial real estate, the prime corner lots in downtown Reno, into an irrevocable private blind trust. Because it was a blind structure, governed outside of the probate process, you had zero visibility regarding its contents. You could see a trust existed, but your own arrogance prevented you from investigating further. You assumed the cash was the only prize worth taking." Brenda stared at the thick legal document resting next to the spilled vintage Bordeaux. Her eyes darted back and forth, trying to process the influx of new financial data. The concept of hidden commercial real estate disrupted her entire understanding of the family hierarchy. "You are lying," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. Helen was drowning in medical debt. She had nothing else. She had a commercial portfolio, I corrected, tapping the cover of the trust instrument, and she designated a single beneficiary to inherit the entire structure. I reached into my pocket and retrieved the heavy cardstock business card belonging to my estate attorney. The embossed silver lettering caught the light of the crystal chandelier. I moved my hand over the table and softly placed Marcus Thorne's card directly on top of the blind trust document, perfectly centering it over a dark red wine stain seeping into the paper edge. "The current market valuation of the commercial trust is $8.2 million, I stated. The numeric figure dropped into the dining room like a physical weight. $8.2 million. It was a sum of capital that defied their comprehension. It was generational wealth. It was the kind of money that alters the trajectory of a bloodline forever. The silence that followed was profound. It was not the tense quiet of an impending argument. It was the hollow, breathless void of total psychological collapse. Vanessa slumped forward, resting her forehead against the cool mahogany wood. The golden child, who had just discovered her parents skimmed $500,000 from her cut, now realized she had forfeited an $8 million empire for a cheap desert house. She had conspired to steal pennies while I inherited the bank. Richard buried his face in his hands, letting out a low, guttural sob. The passive accomplice who had endorsed a forged check to buy metal credit cards finally grasped the true cost of his cowardice. He had sacrificed his relationship with his eldest daughter, his integrity, and his freedom for a fraction of the actual inheritance. But Brenda was the true casualty of the revelation. Her mind simply could not process the scale of her own failure. The woman who prided herself on being the ultimate orchestrator, the brilliant manipulator who controlled every variable, had been outsmarted by a dead widow and a quiet night auditor. 8 million. Brenda repeated the words, stumbling out of her mouth as if she were learning a foreign language. That is not possible. You cannot have that. I am the executor. I manage the estate. You managed a decoy, I replied, securing the strap of my tote bag over my shoulder. You spent 2 years living in a fabricated reality believing you had won. You risked state prison. You alienated your family and you destroyed your reputation for $850,000. You sold your soul for a 10% cut. I looked down at the architect of my misery. The emerald silk blouse suddenly looked cheap. The catered filet mignon looked like discarded scraps. The entire environment she had curated to project superiority was exposed as a shallow, pathetic illusion. Helen left the trust exclusively to the one daughter who never asked for a dime, I said, delivering the final assessment. She left it to the shock absorber. She rewarded the invisible labor you thought you could exploit forever. I turned away from the mahogany table, leaving the forensic timeline, the forged checks, and the certified commercial trust sitting among the ruined food. There was nothing left to debate. The ledger was permanently closed. The truth had locked into place with a slow, satisfying click, and the sound of it was deafening. I turned my back on the dining room and walked down the long hallway toward the heavy walnut front door. My footsteps echoed against the polished concrete floors. Behind me, the silence remained absolute and unbroken. Nobody chased me. Nobody called my name. The sheer magnitude of their strategic failure had paralyzed them. I pushed the front door open and stepped out into the Nevada evening. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, leaving a sky painted in deep indigo and slate. The residual heat radiating from the paved driveway felt different now. It was no longer a suffocating weight. It felt like a warm current pushing me forward, away from the wreckage. I unlocked my aging sedan, climbed into the driver's seat, and started the engine. As I navigated through the curved streets of the gated subdivision, moving past the pristine lawns and the artificial luxury, I realized I was leaving a prison I had helped maintain. For the first time in 32 years, I drove away from my family without carrying a single piece of their emotional or financial baggage. The drive back to my cramped apartment felt remarkably brief. I slept that night without the rattling window air conditioning unit waking me. I slept with the profound silence of a balanced ledger. The aftermath was not handled around a kitchen table or debated in a hostile group text. It was handled in courtrooms and corporate banking offices. Marcus Thorne executed the legal strategy with terrifying efficiency. He submitted the forensic timeline, the forged estate release, and the fraudulent check directly to the district attorney. The state of Nevada does not view coordinated estate fraud as a private domestic dispute. They opened a formal criminal investigation within 48 hours. The procedural fallout was swift and clinical. Warrants were issued. The regional bank located in Reno received a federal subpoena freezing the premier joint brokerage account holding the remnants of the stolen cash. My parents lost access to their funds overnight. The metal wealth management card Brenda had proudly dropped on the bistro patio was suddenly declined. Vanessa faced a separate nightmare. The authorities interviewed her college roommate, Jessica Rollins. When faced with the immediate loss of her notary credential and potential federal wire fraud charges, Jessica prioritized her own survival. She cooperated fully with the state investigators. She surrendered her official logbook and detailed exactly how Vanessa orchestrated the counterfeit stamp. The luxury online boutique my sister planned to launch never secured a business license. Her custom estate in Henderson became a severe liability, tied up in asset forfeiture reviews and crushing property taxes she could no longer afford to pay. The extended relatives who had eagerly participated in Brenda's preemptive smear campaign suddenly went silent. The aggressive text messages and threatening voicemails ceased the moment the indictments became public record. Aunt Patricia and Cousin David did not reach out to apologize for their vicious accusations. People who eagerly consume lies rarely have the courage to digest the truth when it arrives. I did not require their apologies. I initiated a total communication blackout. I did not attend the subsequent holiday gatherings. I ignored the rare group chat notifications. I cut the bloodline clean, leaving them to navigate their self-inflicted consequences alone. While my former relatives navigated the criminal justice system, I navigated my new reality. I sat in the sterile conference room at Marcus Thorne's firm and signed legitimate legal instruments. The independent trustee officially dissolved the blind structure, transferring the deeds for the prime commercial lots in downtown Reno directly into my name. The properties were fully tenanted, featuring high-end retail spaces and corporate offices, generating substantial monthly revenue. I was a multimillionaire, on paper and in practice. I returned to the resort for my night audit shift one final time. I did not stage a dramatic exit or seek validation from my superiors. I printed a standard resignation letter, placed it on the general manager's desk, and worked my scheduled hours. I reconciled the daily revenues, matched the merchant batches, and locked the physical receipts in the vault. When the sun rose over the desert, illuminating the Las Vegas Strip, I handed in my security badge and walked away from the administrative back office forever. 6 months later, I stood on the back balcony of my new residence. I had purchased a quiet mid-century home nestled high in the Nevada foothills, overlooking the sprawling valley. The property was surrounded by natural rock formations and indigenous desert flora. It was remarkably peaceful. The central air conditioning worked flawlessly, but I preferred the cool evening breeze flowing down from the mountains. I held my cellular phone in my hand, resting my forearms against the solid metal railing. The screen displayed a pending voicemail from an unrecognized number. Brenda had been utilizing prepaid devices, attempting to bypass my strict block list. I pressed the speaker icon, allowing the audio to play out into the open air. Her voice was unrecognizable. The polished, authoritarian management tone was entirely eradicated. She sounded small, ragged, and deeply desperate. She pleaded for a second chance. She claimed Richard was struggling with the mounting legal fees and that the stress of the impending trial was ruining their physical health. She begged me to call the district attorney and withdraw my cooperation. She asked me to remember the past and stated that family protects family. She was still attempting to use the old programming. She thought the sound of her crying would activate my lifelong training, forcing me to absorb her crisis. I listened to the entire recording. I did not feel a trace of guilt. I did not feel the familiar urgent need to fix her emergency. The woman weeping through the speaker was a stranger who had forged my signature to steal my future. I simply tapped the screen, deleting the audio file. Then I selected the caller identification and permanently blocked the new number. I looked down at the sprawling grid of city lights illuminating the desert floor. The neon glow of the casino stretched for miles, a testament to the fact that the house always wins when you know how to read the numbers. I realized the ultimate lesson of my own quiet reckoning. Peace is not a natural byproduct of being the designated family workhorse. You do not earn respect by absorbing the liabilities of people who view you as a disposable asset. Peace is the rent you pay to protect what is rightfully yours. It requires maintaining rigid boundaries and refusing to subsidize the comfort of thieves. That is my story. A forged signature, an audited ledger, and an $8 million secret hidden in plain sight. If your family only loves you for the burdens you carry, put them down and see who stays. Thanks for listening. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.